If you think you've already mastered preflop poker, check this out. I'm about to reveal 5 preflop fundamentals that even professional players get wrong. For beginner poker players, improving their preflop fundamentals is often one of the biggest and easiest wins they can make to their poker game as a whole in the shortest amount of time. But preflop is also where many professionals often overlook some of the biggest opportunities to make extra chips in their game. We'll cover exactly how to do that later, but first let's talk about how exactly you can learn your preflop fundamentals in the easiest way possible. Let me show you an incredibly effective way you can get better at your preflop game today, or any day for that matter, in just 5 minutes for absolutely free. Please don't tell the Lucid bosses the Lucid exploit I'm about to show you guys. Okay, for your secret preflop study masterclass, we got Lucid Poker. It's available for free at lucidpoker.com if you would like. You click on Sim Browser, select the game of your choice. Maybe select the game that you're currently playing. For example, maybe you're a cash player and you like to play 6 max cash. Now, maybe you're not sure about your button ranges here and you feel like you get the button ranges wrong. What we can do is we can click this button here. There's a little 3 dots just about there, if you can see that. My lovely circle. We press this little button here and we click Create Custom Drill. Now, you can do this even if you're not a paid member of Lucid. It should automatically filter for the spot that you're looking for. You click Start Drill, and then you can play the button in your game of choice as though you're playing in a real life. Study this relentlessly. It's a really great way to get better at this. For example, I think we should open this. We do open this, just about. Oof. I think we should probably fold this. We do fold this. Happy days. Look, you had ace. It's good fold. Now you can pick whichever game that you like, whichever spot that you like, and you can do this for free. And it's a great way to get really intimate and really knowledgeable about your preflop ranges and your preflop strategy. I would suggest for anybody that's not done a preflop drill like this before to give it a go and maybe blast some of these until you're getting probably about 90% plus right in the games of your choice. You can test yourself by different positions in different games, different formats, for example. But if you haven't been doing this recently, you may be surprised, and certainly I can speak for guys that have played different formats. They are often surprised at what they think is the right preflop range to play. They actually can be quite off with their assumptions. And it's very easy, I think, to get a bit lazy about preflop and think that you've kind of got it all figured out and mastered, and actually you may be a little bit further away than what you realize. So now let's imagine that everybody watching here has taken the time to do some of those preflop drills and has become much more intimate and well studied with their preflop ranges in the game of their choice. Well done. Your foundations are now strong. I'm proud of you for taking the time to work on your game. Essentially, you've passed your preflop driving test, but now it's time to open the hood a little bit and try and examine exactly what's going on in the engine. So let's jump back to Lucid and explore the sim matrix a little bit more. So here we are in the Lucid Sim browser. We're going to be playing a cash game at 100 big blinds. We're going to have the low jack fold, the high jack fold, and you're going to be in the cutoff with a beautiful circle around you. And you're figuring out what is the hands that you're trying to raise versus the hand you're trying to fold here. We just have 2 options, just a fold or a raise to 2.5. I want to draw your attention to this little box here, which is called strategy view, and we've got frequency selected. Let's change that frequency and let's instead make it an EV. Let me just wipe out my circles for a second. Now what we can do is have a look and see what are the kind of hands and what are the kind of expected values that raising those hands has compared to folding them. Now obviously the fold is 0 everywhere. If you have a look at any of the blue hands here, these are folded hands. You don't play them, you don't win money, you don't lose money, you just fold, and therefore it's 0. How can I explain the concept of 0 in a Lucid video? I can't, I'm sorry, but there's probably philosophical channels on YouTube that you could look to if you wanted to figure out what 0 means. It's 0. What you typically find in most poker situations, although not in every single spot, is that you get a pretty clear dividing line about hands that are profitable to play and hands that are unprofitable to play. And this in particular is an important boundary to learn because it's basically going to be your VPIP threshold. Hands that are weaker than this, we lose money by raising them. If we have a look, for example, at 7-2 off, you can see that we're losing about 0.2 big blinds. So if every time we try and min raise 7-2 off in this situation, assuming that our opponents are playing at the equilibrium, we're going to be losing about 1/5 of big blind by attempting to play this 7-2 off. When you go above this line and you see stronger hands, you see they have an expectation that is making profit and therefore they're raising them rather than folding them. That all sounds very easy, and it is easy, or is it? Let's take a look at the Jack 10 off here. I'm going to circle it just for extra emphasis. Now, if we look at the raising EV of Jack 10 off, we see it's 0.03. It makes more than 0, so we raise Jack 10 off here. When we look at Jack 9 off, you see it's worse than 0, and so we always fold Jack 9 off here. If you remember, 7-2 off was 0.2, but I want to ask you a question. Jack 10 off makes 0.03. We know 7-2 off is the worst hand, it loses a fifth of the big blind. What do you think the expectation is of raising pocket aces? Now, we saw that the worst hand in poker, 7-2 off, is losing minus 0.2. If we go back to Jack 10 off and we see it wins 0.03, what do you think the best hand in poker is making relative to this? Genuinely think about it. You can pause the video. I'll pause for 2 seconds to let you pause it. If you're feeling brave enough, why not write your best estimate in the comments below? What is the expected value of aces given that Jack 10 off is 0.03, given the worst hand of poker is minus 0.2? What do you think aces is doing? Okay, let's look at aces. 9.76 expected value here. Raising pocket aces is making 9.76 BB expectation here. To put it another way, min raising aces is 325 times more profitable than min raising Jack 10 off. The strong hands do not scale up on a linear level when it comes to their expected values. So knowing this, a question that was posed in a lovely Upswing article that I will link in the description: why bother to min raise any of these marginal hands at all if they're barely making any money relative to your strong hands? So here's 3 reasons. Reason number 1, they are still profitable. If you look at ace 8 off, if you look at Jack 10 off, Queen 10 off, yes, they don't make much money, and they especially don't make much money compared to the very top of the range. However, they are still profitable, and you are just leaving chips out there on the table in equilibrium play if you don't play these hands as a raise and just fold them instead. Reason number 2, and this is a big one, your opponents, even inexperienced ones, will very quickly notice if you were to fold all of these marginal hands in this spot. So if you were to only play the very strongest hands, your opponents will notice very, very quickly. And so what happens? Your opponents stop paying you off. If you're only raising the very top 5% of hands, you're not going to get 3-bet so much. You're not going to get paid off so much post-flop. You're not going to get paid off so much pre-flop. And therefore the EV of the top end of your range, that at 9.76, actually starts reducing as well. So you lose a little bit of the EV of raising the Queen 10, but you also start losing some of the EV of aces because your opponents start responding more efficiently against your actual range. The third reason is that poker is supposed to be fun, and playing just 5% of your range is pretty boring way to sit at the table for most of us. Some people might really enjoy that, of course, in which case all power to you. But for most of us, it's a bit more interesting to be involved in pots, especially if we are involved in those pots with a profitable expectation. However, just because the solver is playing all of these marginal hands at 100% frequency doesn't mean that you should always be playing these hands also at 100% frequency. And that brings us on to point number 3 about the fundamentals of preflop poker. Now, if you're enjoying or getting some value about the preflop fundamentals, maybe you think it'd be fun if you'd like to flop on over to the like button, or I tell you what, it would be mental if you pressed that subscribe button. Fundamental. Thanks very much. It really helps the channel, and we're going to keep trying to bring you weekly strategy videos into 2026 too. Now, preflop fundamental point number 3 is going to be the question: how can I exploit people pre-flop but still be playing GTO ranges? So hopefully by now you've learned that the solvers show us a great baseline of hands that are profitable in equilibrium play versus hands that are unprofitable play in equilibrium play. One excellent foundational strategy that you can use to win more chips off a wider range of opponents is to consider the mixed hands that you play in any given situation, and then consider the impact of your opponent's tendencies on the EV of those mixed hands. For example, let's jump back to Lucid here. Let's put you back in the cutoff, and let's imagine that you're playing an opponent on the big blind that you know is very passive. They overfold lots to preflop action, they under 3-bet bluff. This tendency from the big blind adds a lot of EV when it comes to the marginal hands you have here. For example, let's think about some of the marginal hands we have here, some of the mixed frequency opens. Hands like 9-7 suited, hands like 8-7 suited, hands like 7-6 suited, and many other lovely hands here that I'm doing a great job circling. These are all hands that have 0 EV expectations in raising when it comes to equilibrium play. However, we've already talked about how this big blind opponent is more passive than equilibrium. Now all of a sudden, all of these mixed EV hands that are circled here, or at least attempted to be circled here, are now going to gain EV. When you get more folds pre, when you get 3-bet less, the EV of your marginal hands are going to increase. So now let's imagine that the same big blind opponent is going to be too aggressive. So rather than overfolding pre, they're now underfolding pre. They're going to be over 3-bet bluffing. Now all of a sudden, the expectation of all of our marginal hands is below 0. And in fact, the best thing we could do with all of these hands that are mixed here, all of these hands will be better served folding. But here's where things can get more exciting, especially as a more experienced poker pro. You don't just need to only take in the pre-flop tendencies of your opponents when it comes to making pre-flop decisions. Every single tendency that you know from your opponents on every single street filters through and has an impact on the expected values of your VPIPs of marginal hands when it comes to pre-flop. Those impacts can be a little bit complicated and nuanced, so this is a bit of a simplification. But as a starting framework from which to work from, consider the following statement. Your opponent's tendencies can either help or hurt your marginal VPIPs pre-flop. And let me show you what I mean. Imagine you've been keeping diligent notes on your opponents at the tables. Let's imagine you're playing someone at the poker table that you know has the following tendencies. They're going to overfold 2 flop c-bets. They're going to under check raise bluff the flop. They're going to under pro bet bluffs. And they're going to overfold a turn c-bets. They're also going to play a little bit too wide pre-flop. This is probably one of the default player types that you'll play a lot, a little bit too wide pre-flop and then a little bit too passive post-flop. If you like, you can weight all these tendencies as either something that is incentivizing your pre-flop VPIPs or disincentivizing your pre-flop VPIPs. In this case, the blue is incentivizing your marginal hands and playing wider. The red is disincentivizing them. In this case, we've got 4 blue tendencies, if you like, and 1 red tendency, and you should be looking to play all of your marginal VPIPs against this opponent. You are going to make more than 0 EV with all of them, and so all of your mixed hands should be 100% open against this player type if you want to make the most amount of chips. Now let's consider a second player type. In this case, we've got someone that is overfolding versus delay, but they're also 3-betting aggressively pre-flop. They have a high check raise on the flop. They're calling the river very wide. They're not unhappy at all about hero calling a bluff catcher with just ace high, let's say, or king high. They're a frequent overbet user, and they love a donk bet on flops and turns, and even happy to make some donk bets on rivers. Again, this would be maybe a very aggressive opponent, someone that loves to put pressure on. And what does this mean when it comes to the marginal VPIPs? Well, in this case, we now have 5, if you like, red tendencies, which are all disincentivizing our marginal hands, and we've got 1 blue tendency which is incentivizing our marginal hands. But in this case, playing our marginal VPIPs with these tendencies would be a losing proposition, and we should just be looking to fold them. These tendencies are fantastic when we have the top of the range. If you imagine you have aces, all of these attributes of a player that we're playing are brilliant. We're very happy with all of these tendencies when we have the top of the range, but our marginal hands are just not making EV. So pre-flop fundamental number 5, when should you go full exploit mode and put the hammer down? Well, let's imagine that someone has jammed 5 hands in a row and you're pretty confident they're looking to jam the next hand in a row. This is probably not an uncommon occurrence. Most of you watching have probably played someone that's just jamming any 2 cards at some point, and it can be pretty easy, I think, to think about what your adjustments would be in that situation. In such a case, VPIPing any hand that isn't prepared to call the preflop all-in would be a clear EV mistake, and you should be prepared to deviate much wider in this case. Trying to stay strictly within the realms of equilibrium play and even just within the realms of the mixed hand strategies would be a mistake, and is very much missing the O of the GTO. It would not be optimal. Whilst it would be balanced, it would not be optimal. In more normal situations where the tendencies are perhaps less extreme, there still will be situations where you're able to deviate more than just the mixed frequency hands that we talked about. Remember, in most situations around your VPIP threshold, the marginal hands are pretty close whether they're a raise or a fold. It doesn't take much for an opponent's tendencies to make a lot of hands unprofitable, or vice versa, make a lot of hands very profitable. Make sure though that you are aware there is an inherent risk in deviating too much pre-flop. As a general rule in most cases, the more extreme adjustments you're making from your pre-flop equilibrium baseline, the easier it becomes for any reasonable opponent to pick up and notice what you are doing. If they have that awareness, then most opponents are going to begin to make changes within their game that can turn your initial deviations from being a source of profit to your game to instead becoming one of the biggest sources of losses to your game. However, by making more minimally exploitative adjustments and using that rounding strategy of playing mixed frequency hands pre-flop at either 0 or 100%, it becomes almost impossible for any opponents to realistically figure out what you're doing. This keeps your adjustments much more disguised and much more hidden, allowing you to potentially protect and maintain a profit source for much longer and much more sustainably. Now, some of the best poker players I know don't have a rigid pre-flop strategy. They don't just try and memorize charts and then implement them statically. They consider opponents and they think about whether there's room to adjust or not. Not only this, but their adjustments are fluid. Sometimes they may find an opponent that they can have big pre-flop adjustments with. Other times it may just be a case of that more minimally exploitative approach. And in some cases, even go for a pure equilibrium approach against the right kind of opponents. I'm going to conclude this video with a meme here. If you're a more beginner poker player watching and you don't currently have a great idea of the exact hands you should be playing in equilibrium play, one of the best things you can do to improve your game is to actually move towards a more static pre-flop style. Think about the hands that you should be playing in equilibrium play and try and implement that strategy and see how it goes. A lot of beginner guys are making big pre-flop errors without realizing it, and taking time to develop a more static pre-flop strategy could be a massive boost to their poker IQ, if you like. For the more experienced player, once you have gained a good understanding of your pre-flop, it might actually be time to unlearn some of the pre-flop strategy in terms of playing so statically. Once you can get to a level where you're more thinking about your opponents and their tendencies and understanding more the fluidity of your ranges, in particular pay attention to the EV of various hands, and remember especially that many hands in your range are incredibly marginal and the win rates between them are very fine. Hands that are just raises or just folds are very fluid, and if you can think situationally, there can be situations where you should be playing probably 10, 15, 20% wider, and in other situations playing 10, 15% tighter, and capture a lot more EV at the tables by making those pre-flop adjustments. Thank you very much for watching this year. I'm wishing you the best for poker in 2026. If you'd like to watch another video about some pre-flop strategy, why not take a look at this video here, where it's a video about stacking off with pocket jacks. I'll see you there. Cheers.